Welcome to Tuscan Talks, Senior Living Today. Senior living communities have come a long way from the days they were referred to as old folks' homes. Senior living has become hospitality on steroids, and seniors are living it up, leading enriching and fulfilling lives. Join me in a rewarding conversation with experts, professionals, practitioners, and seniors, explaining what senior living is all about. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Tuscan Talks, Senior Living Today. I am absolutely thrilled and totally delighted that we have received an acceptance to our invitation to have, she goes by either Dr. Laura Olson or Professor Laura Olson, or her preference is Laura. And so for that reason, I'm going to call her Laura, not out of disrespect, because that's what she prefers. Laura, you know, as we've talked about before in an introduction to this podcast, that we have as our viewers on the one side or listeners on the other, we have caregivers, people who are involved in some aspect of senior living, residents, family members, people who are just checking it out and checking out all aspects of senior living. So it's really the broad gamut of those people who've been exposed in some particular way. And in some cases, it's both professional. In other cases, it's strictly personal. And for all of you listening today or watching us today, I am just so incredibly just awed. I told Laura earlier before we got on that I have never had a guest, and I'm not sure that I've ever spoken with anybody who had a 14-page resume. And it just, I can't even tell you, it just went on and on and on. All of the articles and all of the panel discussions and podcasts and so forth that Laura's been on as a university professor, and also just because of her story. So she has a particular perspective. One of them relates to or comes from, of course, personal stories, which we're going to get to in a second. And then others just based upon her academic background as a professor. I will also tell you, by the way, we have one book, and unfortunately, I wish that I could get you to sign this, but Zoom doesn't figure that one out yet. But I read, by the way, which is your story, and so I certainly understand much of what your background is. But of course, our viewers and listeners do not. And that's one book, by the way, out of many more that Laura has written, and there are some that I'm just going to ask you a couple comments about or questions about before we get off the show. So I'm going to, at this point in time, just sort of stop talking, give you the floor. What I'd like you to be able to do before we talk about the issues and before we talk about, some of your suggested opinions and thoughts and so forth about those issues, I just want everybody to just understand what your story is and how you got where you are with respect to some of that. So feel free to start there, Laura, and then we'll go from there.
Yes, good. Okay. I started studying aging policy, elder care in 1974. And I was quite young then and didn't really ever think about growing old myself, which is kind of interesting now that I'm 76 years old. But I had my first book, which was on the aging in the United States and some of the underlying issues that cause people to have challenges in their old age. And that was the first book. But then I went on to The Graying of the World, which was an edited book with prominent people from France and Britain and many other countries, and how other countries treat their elderly and kind of social policies that they have. And then I decided to go through my book. My next book was Age Through Ethnic Lenses, which was really looking at the different challenges that people had based on religion, based on gender, based on ethnicity. And it was kind of interesting to see how different it is. I know you're Italian, and there's a chapter in there on the Italian approach, which was kind of interesting to me. Then I went on I wrote the Not So Golden Years, which talks about updating really what challenges people have in this country, in the United States, to live a successful aging. I know there was a movement about that time called successful aging, which was really talking about how everybody's going to do well and happy. And to me, I kind of saw certain people having greater challenges than others. So it really looks at the darker side of the successful aging. My next book was The Politics of Medicaid. And why is that related to aging? Most people don't know that 1/3 of all Medicaid goes to long-term care, mostly nursing homes, although more and more to home care. And then in the middle of all of this research and these years of studying it, my mother got sick. Now, I'll just tell you a little bit about my mother. She was a very athletic woman. She won gold medals in the Olympic, not the regular Olympics, the senior Olympics, in swimming, in basketball, and in bicycle racing. And she did that until she was about 80 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she was an amazing woman. And then all of a sudden, she had two things happen. One with Parkinson's disease, and then she started to go blind. And very slowly, my life became not an academic writing about elder care, but an actual long distance caregiver. Very reluctantly, as I say in my book, this is not something I wanted to do.
Right.
And as the years went by, it became, clear she needed more and more care. So that's when I decided to write the book on elder care journey. And one of the things I discovered and what prompted me to write the book was that everything I studied, all the things I've written about, came into a wholly new perspective. And I saw everything in entirely different ways after that.
So that was 2017 when you did elder care journey. So when did your mother pass away then?
Oh, no. She, when did she pass away? She passed away about 3 years ago.
Got it. Okay. Right. That's what I was gathering because I didn't catch that in the book. So
no. When I wrote the book, she was still alive.
Got it. Let me ask you a question before you continue on, just out of curiosity, because you would have been, based upon what you're saying, somewhere around maybe 29 when you started to get really involved in aging. What was your Ph.D. on? Your doctorate was finished by that point?
Yeah. My doctorate was finished. It had nothing to do with that. It was on the defeat of the Olympics in Colorado.
Okay. All right. Nothing about aging with your PhD.
No.
I got it. Okay. So very specific. What was it about aging that suddenly that you got this, obviously it's been a deep dive ever since. So what was it that was the catalyst for that?
Yeah, it was kind of a roundabout way. I was very interested in pension funds. And then I discovered that a lot of pension funds, which is for the aged, were being used for things that didn't seem proper. And then I started thinking, well, what about the people whose pension funds these belong to? What is it like for them? And so eventually I got into looking at the aged themselves.
Interesting. Okay.
These pension funds were making huge amounts of money, and all these elderly, a really large percentage, were suffering from lack of income. So there's a big divide among the aged, a huge divide. There are those who can barely live from Social Security check to the next. And then there's the others who don't know what to do with all their riches. So it's a huge divide.
And we're definitely going to go back to that because I suspect that you have some strong opinions about what that divide looks like. from a public policy standpoint. I do want to mention, and this is really to hear about your story, but in my instance, I mentioned my mother was from Italy, and you obviously made that reference to the Italian system. I never gave senior living a thought. It was really my entry into senior living and what ultimately became Tuscan Gardens was because I took a look at what mom was doing. And, mom, after my dad passed away, we moved her 7 minutes away from us. And, she was like right there. We would visit her and she was fine until she wasn't. And so, we got a full-time caregiver to live with her, to cook for her and so forth. And, her friends were passing away. And the only people she had visiting her at that point were my family, my personal family, every Saturday and Sunday. So that's when I started looking at senior living communities and couldn't find anything that made any sense to me. So I ended up starting Tuscan Gardens, founding it because of that. But that catalyst for me it was not, it had nothing to do with any academics or anything to do with finance or anything like that. It was just, where can mom experience her golden years? Where could she experience quality of life where she has the opportunity to socialize? And Tuscan Gardens ultimately became the result of that. So in yours, though, it seems to me it was just a gradual movement over to senior living, but to seniors and aging as part of the process that you got. The deeper you got, the deeper you went in that process. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. The thing is, getting back to these stark differences, one of the main issues in my book, and certainly my mother's experience and my experience with her, is that my mother was very poor. And because of that, her journey through blindness and her journey through her disease was much more challenging because we couldn't hire a full-time housekeeper.
Right.
With my income, my husband's retired. With my income, I can live a decent life, but I could not afford a full-time housekeeper for her.
Right.
And that made her situation much more stark. And a lot of the examples I give in the book are based on the fact that we had to go through the challenges and the hoops of the social welfare system.
Right.
So for people, and I will add, even people who have lots of money, there's also challenges with AIDS as well. It's not a breeze.
Got it. And so how did you address that for your mother? I know that you talk about it in the book, but for the viewers and the listeners, how did you address that?
Well, first of all, for many, many years, I was a long distance caregiver.
Right.
And one of the things I had to deal with is forms. And one of the, as you probably read in the book, one of the biggest problems I faced was HIPAA. Mm-hmm. I don't know, for the audience, HIPAA is, whenever you go to a physician's office, you have to sign about 20 different forms, right? Mm-hmm. That's all because of HIPAA.
Yeah.
But because of HIPAA, they wouldn't let me find out any information. It was almost impossible to deal with my mother's needs because of the so-called privacy laws. I don't think people understand how hard that makes a caregiver for a long distance caregiver.
Right.
And I ended up having to fax forms on a regular basis. I got a durable attorney. I had to get that. And then I had to send that form on a regular basis, which was delaying finding out information and helping my mother. So it was very hard to help a long distance.
So was your mother during the latter years, her last years, was she in some type of community or facility or?
She was in public housing. And my mother was a very independent person and had never told me about how the recertification process worked. And I can't even imagine that she was able to do this, although she did have a social worker in public housing to help. But every year you have to recertify, and the assumption of social welfare, I discovered, is that you don't deserve what you're getting. Prove it. And that was just constantly, including her housing.
Yeah, I can imagine that would have been painful. That would have been painful to deal with.
Oh, it was just constant trying to get receipts, trying to get, my mother's birth certificate proved to be a problem because I guess my mother was the ninth of 9 children. And I guess my grandmother had run out of names or something, but they called her baby Katz until they came up with a name. And boy, that didn't sit well with a lot of agencies. They wanted a name on that birth certificate. And I had to tell them, this is the only birth certificate she has.
If we kind of take a look at, you talked about the issue. One issue is that when you're dealing with the lower income segment, that represents, and Medicaid represents approximately a third, right? Is that a fair statement?
I would say it's probably a bit more.
A little bit more than a third?
And mostly women.
And mostly women.
Yeah.
So, obviously many of your books are about public policy issues. So how do you address it? And if you consider that to be one of the primary issues, how do you address it? What can you do from a public policy perspective?
I consider the hoops that you have to go through to get whatever is available a very, very key issue. But there's so many other issues. For example, my mother, I happened, because I studied it, I happen to know a lot about Medicaid. I wrote a book on it. So I was able to find a Medicaid waiver for my mother so that she could get caregivers. And I blithely wrote, yeah, there's a gap in services, there's long waiting lines, and then moved on. Well, I discovered that gaps in services meant you're not getting a lot of help. And when my mother got certified for Medicaid caregiver, she got the maximum allowable at the time, and that was 10 hours a week.
Oh, my.
And there's no way my mother was going to be able to stay at home by herself at that point. She was blind. She could barely walk. She could walk, but barely. She couldn't really cook for herself. And I managed to put money in and get her more help, but certainly not full time.
Right.
So I discovered that the stingy Medicaid, really the reason that Medicaid can give so few hours is because they're assuming there's going to be a caregiver around, a family member, usually a daughter, a wife or a daughter around to pick up the slack.
Right.
But if there's no wife or daughter around, you can't, 10 hours is useless.
No, it's absolutely, what can you do with 10 hours in a week?
And it's at night, was at night, and it didn't include weekends, which made it, and eventually, I will add, my mother fell and ended up in a nursing home, so.
And how was that handled? Was that also with Medicaid waiver of some type in the nursing home?
No, Medicare pays for, if you're in the hospital for 3 days, Medicare pays for rehabilitation. And so my mother went into a nursing home just for rehabilitation.
Got it.
And that's a whole story unto itself.
Well, but what did happen though? So was she there for the duration?
No, she was there for until they kicked her out.
Right.
Medicare has this rule that you can only get rehabilitation, and you can get it as long as you need it if you're improving.
Right.
But once you stop improving, they don't include maintenance. So
Right.
once you stop improving, they kick you out.
You're out. Right.
Right. But the nursing home experience was so horrific that she ended up losing her ability to walk in the nursing home.
Oh my.
So there was no, so it was really very challenging at that point what we were going to do with her.
Right. So
yeah.
once she left the nursing home, then what happened? She went back to.
Well, I found her assisted living.
Okay.
And it was absolutely gorgeous when I went there. It was one of the most beautiful places. It had a swimming pool. It had shiny, I'll never forget it. Everything was clean and shiny and just, it was just immaculate. And
A shiny new nickel, right?
And I was like, just enthralled, like, oh, my mother, and she could afford it, with a little help from me, but she can afford it from her Social Security check. And I was like, oh, yes, I'll keep her here. This will be great. Assisted living will work really well. I was going to pay her aide, who I adored, to come stay with her, at least in the beginning and all of that. And it turned out to be a sham, a fraud. It was pretty scary.
In what regard? I'm sure
they just left her in bed.
They just left her in bed there?
Yeah. And luckily I had my aide who came to see her and she didn't speak English very well. So our communication was not great.
Yeah.
But Julie would say to me on the phone, I don't know, no look good here. And it turned out that they were just leaving their the elders in bed all day.
Right. Understood. So where was this, by the way? What state?
This was in Florida.
That's kind of what I suspected. Right. Yeah, because we're obviously in Florida too, but there are an awful lot of senior living communities in the state of Florida, as you can imagine.
They should have closed it down. This was pretty, I had my hands full, and I probably should have pursued that, but this was really a sham. They were just pocketing the money and doing nothing.
Yeah, and just leaving her in bed.
Yeah, and all the other people too, not just my mother.
Right, sure. And so is that where she stayed for the duration, or did she go anywhere else afterwards?
No, then she fell again, and no, she got sick. She didn't fall this time. She got very sick from being there.
Right.
And they had no interest in caring for her. So without even telling me, they sent her to the hospital.
Right.
She could have stayed there if they even tried. She wasn't that sick, but they sent her to the hospital. And then she was in the hospital for about 3 or 4 days. And then she went back to another nursing home for rehab.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I learned that I didn't quite understand from my academic work is you can't quite choose a nursing home. Because I had the ability to look at the quality of care in nursing homes and pick one out that I thought was better than the others.
Right.
I can't do that. They won't take Medicaid patients.
Right.
That if you end up getting on Medicaid 2 or 3 years later, they can't kick you out, but they won't take them to begin with. So she ended up in I think the second nursing home was worse than the first.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was pretty scary. It was actually the nursing home. My publisher wouldn't let me put this in, but wouldn't let me, talk about this. But it was actually the nursing home that was negligent during one of the hurricanes, and all kinds of patients, many patients died. It was the
Yeah.
same nursing home.
Yeah.
It was really an egregious place.
Yeah, I think bearing in mind the fact that in Florida, we probably know what that particular nursing home is because it got a lot of publicity at the time.
It did, yeah.
Yeah. So I want just let me go. I do want to redirect you. I mean, I can hear the horrendous story and the horrendous experiences, and believe me, I've heard them. I've heard very similar stories of that nature, and particularly one thing that you are doing is you're putting that spotlight though on the income and the income component. That is that you're dealing with an economic demographic that has a tough time without some type of public assistance affording what would be considered to be adequate care. And I'm wondering, just in my mind, and you think about it, you've done the deep dive. What do you do? How do you, from a public policy standpoint, how do you address the many, many problems and challenges that we have in taking care of our elderly? How do you do it?
Well, I'm actually not opposed to a nursing home type of situation.
Right.
But I think we need to have places that are decent, that provide the best that they can. And I don't think that you can do this on a profit-making basis. Most other countries don't have profit-making nursing homes. They have nonprofits. And all the studies show that the nonprofit nursing homes are far superior.
Right.
The most important piece of a nursing home is the caregivers.
Yeah, the clinical care, sure.
Not so much the clinical care, the ones who bathe them, the ones who change their diapers, the ones who walk them.
Got it.
And those have to be of high quality.
Right.
They have to be paid a decent wage.
Right.
Like I hear all the time, we can't find caregivers. The reason we have 30 patients to one caregiver is we can't find any. And of course, the reason they can't find any is it's a very, very arduous job. I don't know if you know this, but being a caregiver is one of the major reasons that people get sick on the job.
Mm-hmm.
Lifting patients is a very hard job, and it causes back problems. It wrenches you emotionally, and these people need decent wages. They need to have health care. They need retirement benefits.
Sure. So where does that money come from? From the standpoint of when you're not dealing with private sector payment obviously from a socioeconomic demographic that can afford to cut a check. So for that bottom, let's say 40% socioeconomics, which require public assistance, where does it come from? Does it come from just increasing? Is there a policy change required?
Well, one of the things we could do is have long-term care social insurance. I know that when President Obama was trying to pass his Affordable Care Act, he left long-term care out because it would add to the expense.
Right.
But I think if we had long-term care insurance, social insurance, not individual insurance,
right,
where everybody put in when they're young, and there was a pot of money like Social Security and Medicare. That would be one funding source.
Do you achieve the same objective by simply, and I don't want to simplify, none of this is simple, but by simply incorporating that social insurance component into the existing structure of Medicare?
It could be done. I haven't really thought that much about incorporating it, but it certainly could be done. I mean, right now, Medicaid is the third largest or fourth largest, I forget now, it's changed, item on the federal budget. And it's literally the second largest item on in nearly all state budgets. And 1/3 of all of that money goes to long-term care. So
Right.
the government is already supporting long-term care. It's just supporting inadequate places. So,
And that's kind of why I was thinking about this, Laura, is the fact that as I read your book and I was listening just now to you, it just seemed to me that, for example, Tuscan Gardens, we don't take Medicaid. We wouldn't take a Medicaid resident because that's just not what we do. And I think that part of the issue is, and God knows that, certainly for those individuals that their only choice is what, ostensibly is a Medicaid facility, in which case you have the issues that you discussed. There's not a lot of money to go around. And so you struggle to try to figure out how to pay the bills and how to pay for the caregivers, but it's those caregivers that make all the difference in the world to quality care. So, you sort of think about this split, whereas in Medicare is a very, it's commonly accepted. It's not about the socioeconomically deprived. It's about a basket of services which are required medically. And of course, as we all know, the greatest percentages of those types of medical expenses occur when you're aging, when you just get old. And so I'm just wondering if by expanding the envelope, if you will, of Medicare to provide that type of quality care, whether you wouldn't have a different type of outcome.
yeah, I'm not quite sure of, how I would structure it yet, because as I said, I haven't really thought about incorporating Medicare into it. But I'd like to get back to your point. A nonprofit nursing home, which tends to have better ratios and better quality, better ratios of patients per caregiver and more quality caregivers, and doesn't take Medicaid for the exact reasons that you're saying Tuscan Gardens doesn't, because they can't afford to, because Medicaid pays so little.
Right, sure, exactly. Exactly.
And even though it's the incredible, just think about it, the third or fourth largest item on the federal budget, and it's right next to education in every state in terms of dollars going out. And yet we have such horrendous nursing homes for people on Medicaid. There's nothing very logical.
Sure.
But I certainly wouldn't expect a nonprofit to be able to afford Medicaid. I'm just not aghast that they don't. It makes sense. Just like a lot of doctors don't accept Medicaid. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't.
Right. Sure, understood. Let me ask you this. You did mention Italy, for example, and obviously I have
It wasn't Italy, by the way. It was Italian Americans.
It was Italian American.
Yes.
The ethnic, Italian American ethnic.
Yes.
I got it. Because I was actually wondering what is that, the Italian system? That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, no, I wasn't the Italian system. It was Italian Americans and how they treat, as you could well imagine, they don't throw their elderly into nursing homes.
Yes.
They have big families.
Yes. And that's exactly the situation. So in my mom's case, it would never have dawned on us. And mom just point blank said that, because we offered mom to come live with us. And she just point blank said, no, you need to live your life. You need to live your life. And I said, Mom, it's okay. And no, you need to live your life. So, that's why we got the house nearby for her and kind of went in that direction.
Well, one thing that I learned is that it would have been impossible to take my mother in. Literally impossible, and hold a job.
Sure.
Given that she was blind.
Yeah. Right.
Had Parkinson's disease, I would have had to lift her. In nursing homes, they have mechanical lifts, I would have had, my mother was 180 pounds, probably even more.
Oh my God.
It could not have been done.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Understood.
And I have,
I'm going to
yeah.
just switch your topic again. I'm just noticing that you have spring of 2021. The book was Ethically Challenged: Private Equity Storms U.S. Healthcare.
My
Now,
favorite book.
yeah, and it says in the resume forthcoming, but obviously it's been published at this point, right?
Nope, it's coming out next week.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So talk to me, talk to us about it. So just what's the thesis?
Well, I think it's my most important book. What you have in the United States right now is the stealthy takeover of healthcare by private equity firms. The difference between a private equity firm and a corporation, they both seek profits. I mean, clearly a corporation needs to have profits. That's what they do. But they have other concerns. They care about their product. They care about their community in many cases. They have long-term interests. Private equity has only one goal: outsized profits, not just profits. They have to beat the market or nobody will invest. And they don't care about the product because they sell within 4 or 5 years.
Right.
They have no long-term interests. And they've been buying up, my study focuses on certain niches, but for the purpose of this conversation, 2 of those niches is home health care and hospice.
Oh,
and they've
really?
been, yes. And they've been buying, and you can imagine if the only interest is profit and to sell as quickly as possible, what that is doing to hospice and home health care.
Got it. Got it. So you're driving margins. You're
sorry?
driving profit margins, and you're flipping as a
Yeah,
private equity.
it's a whole different, the playbook is wholly different from a corporation. And some of the I can't say most, but a significant percentage of the billionaires in this country come from private equity.
Private equity. Yeah.
Yeah. And right now they have so much cash, they call them dry powder.
Yes. Right.
To buy things. And they've run out of Toys R Us, which they decimated, and they ran out of, they're right now in Chewy's, which they're decimating. They've run out of these retail places, Nabisco, and all those, and they're moving into healthcare. And it's very, very steady. If you go to a dentist or you go to a physician, could be a private equity firm owning it now.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. Well, great. So when is that book coming out? When did you say?
Next week.
Next week. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I got my,
it was a slow process. It took Johns Hopkins a long time to get it out, but it is coming out.
So do you still maintain a full-time position as a professor at Lehigh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I should have mentioned, by the way, you're at Lehigh University. So I didn't mention that. Yeah. So you're actively involved. Obviously you're researching, you're writing, you're
I'll be the last one standing. I don't intend to retire.
I have great appreciation for that. They joke around here that I have, and I certainly say I am going to continue to do what I do until God tells me that I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, my husband said he's going to put on my graveyard, she wished I had spent more time in the office.
That's right. Exactly. Well, listen, it has been, Laura, it's been a delight. I had the signals from Kieran and Paula saying that our time is about up. We try to keep it about 30 minutes, and we went over that. It has been a delight.
It's been a pleasure here as well.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm so honored that you were willing to be on the show. I'm
honored that you asked me. So
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank
And
you.
thank you.
And good luck to you and your family.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Tuscan Talks, Senior Living Today. For more information about us, our guests, our communities, and for a full library of our episodes and resource materials, visit TuscanTalks.com. See you next time.